The world was quiet now, too quiet. Gia pulled her thin blanket closer around her shoulders. The basement was cold and dark, just how she needed it to be. Outside, the sun was setting. She could see the orange glow through the small, dirty window near the ceiling. 3 years ago, the Pyro Dynasty came to Earth. The giant fire-breathing dragons from space wanted one thing: heat, and humans had plenty of it. They hunted people like animals, burning cities, and taking prisoners. Now, at 14 years old, Jaya might be the last human left in Korea. Maybe the last one on Earth. Stay cold to stay alive, Da had told her before he died. Dad was the man who ran the orphanage where Jia grew up. He taught her how to slow her breathing and lower her body temperature. It was this skill that kept her hidden from the dragon's heat-seeking eyes. Jia's stomach growled. She looked at her small pile of canned food. Only 3 cans left. Soon she would have to leave her safe place to find more. She crawled to the far corner of the basement and pulled out a small metal box. Inside was a photo of all the children from the orphanage, taken before the dragons came. 20 smiling faces. Jia touched each face gently with her finger. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I promise I won't forget you." A loud crash outside made her jump. Jia quickly put away the photo and pressed her ear to the wall. The sound of heavy feet crushing broken glass came from above. Dragons. They were patrolling again. Jia closed her eyes and began the breathing exercise Da had taught her. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7. Out through the mouth for 8. With each breath, she imagined her body growing colder, like ice forming over a lake. The footsteps moved closer to the orphanage building. Jia could hear the low rumble of dragon voices. They spoke Korean, but with a strange accent that made their words sound like crackling fire. "This area is clear," one voice said. "No heat signatures." "Check again," another voice answered. "The Emperor wants to be sure." Jia held her breath. The basement grew silent except for the sound of her heart beating in her ears. After what felt like hours, the footsteps moved away. Jia let out a long, slow breath, careful not to warm herself too quickly. She looked at her food pile again. 3 cans, maybe 4 days if she ate very little. The winter was coming, and the dragons were more active in cold weather, hunting for any heat they could find. Jia pulled out her map of Seoul. She had marked all the places she had already searched for food. The small store 3 blocks away was empty now. The big market 5 blocks north had collapsed. Maybe the houses on the east side still had something in their kitchens. As she planned her next move, Jia's fingers traced the route she would take. She would need to go at the coldest part of night. She would wear layers of clothes to hide her body heat. She would move slowly, carefully, like a shadow. Survival was a daily battle. But Jia had one advantage the dragons didn't know about. Humans were more than just heat sources. They were smart. They could adapt. They could hide. Jia looked at the photo one more time before hiding it away. Then she checked her small backpack, making sure everything was ready for tomorrow night's dangerous journey. Outside, a dragon roared, the sound like thunder rolling across the empty city. Jia didn't flinch. Fear created heat, and heat meant death. "I am ice," she whispered to herself. "I am stone. I am shadow." The last human girl closed her eyes and continued to wait for darkness. The night was black and cold when Jia finally left her hiding place. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, which was good. Darkness was her friend. She moved like a ghost between broken buildings. Her backpack was light on her shoulders. Her feet made no sound on the ash-covered ground. She had wrapped them in cloth to hide her footprints. The small store she hoped to find food in was 5 blocks away. Jia knew every step by heart. She had studied her map for hours. In and out, she whispered to herself. Quick and quiet. A sudden wind blew dust into her face. Jia froze and pressed herself against a wall. The dragons could feel even small changes in the air. She waited, counting her breaths. In for 4. Hold for 7. out for 8. When she felt sure it was safe, she moved on. The store was just ahead. Its front windows were broken. The door hung open like a mouth. Jia slipped inside and pulled out her small light. She flashed it quickly around the room. Most shelves were empty. Others were knocked over. But in the back, behind a fallen shelf, she saw what she needed, cans that other people had missed. Jia smiled. Food meant life. Life meant hope. She worked quickly, filling her backpack with cans. She didn't look at what kind they were. Any food was good food now. Then she heard it, a soft scraping sound outside the store. Something big was moving nearby. Jia turned off her light and dropped to the floor. The sound came closer. Heavy breathing. The smell of smoke and hot metal. A dragon was right outside. Jia closed her eyes and focused on being cold. She slowed her heart. She made her body like ice. She had done this many times before when dragons passed by her basement. She just needed to stay still and... Crash! Her elbow had knocked over a can. It rolled across the floor, the sound like thunder in the quiet night. Heat signature detected, a voice said outside. Jia jumped to her feet and ran toward the back door. Her mind raced faster than her feet. There had to be a way out. There always was. But as she pushed open the back door, she saw a large shape waiting for her. In the darkness, 2 bright eyes glowed orange like coals. The dragon named Quan had been hunting in this area for weeks, hoping to find the last humans. "Don't move," Quan said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Jia turned and ran back into the store. She knocked over shelves behind her to slow the dragon. She headed for the front door. A blast of heat hit the wall next to her. The dragon had breathed fire, not to kill her but to warn her. The message was clear: stop or burn. Jia's mind worked fast. The dragons wanted humans alive. They drained heat from living bodies, not dead ones. This gave her a chance. She dropped to the ground and made herself as cold as possible. Maybe the dragon would think she had died from fear. It had happened to others. But Quan was smarter than that. He approached slowly, his claws clicking on the broken floor. "Interesting," he said. "Your heat signature is much lower than normal humans. This explains how you stayed hidden so long." Jia didn't answer. She kept her eyes closed, her body still. Quan reached down and picked her up with one claw. Jia didn't fight. Fighting meant heat, and heat meant the dragon would find her weakness. "Commander Han will be very pleased," Quan said, speaking into a device on his arm. "I have captured what may be the last human in this region. And this one is different." As Quan carried her out into the night, Jia kept her face blank. But inside, her mind was working. The dragons had caught her, yes, but they didn't know what she was capable of. They thought they had caught prey. They didn't know they had caught a predator. The dragon ship was huge, bigger than any building Jia had ever seen. It floated above what used to be the Pacific Ocean, its metal skin glowing red like a giant coal. Quan carried Jia through long hallways that felt too hot for normal humans. But Jia was not normal. She kept her body cool even as sweat ran down her face. "You should be screaming," Quan said. "Most humans cannot take this heat." Jia said nothing. She watched. She learned. Every turn, every door, every dragon they passed. She remembered it all. They stopped at a round metal door. Quan placed his claw on a panel, and the door slid open. "Commander Han," Quan said, bowing his large head. "I have brought the human." The room was filled with screens showing maps of Earth. In the center stood a dragon bigger than Quan. His scales were dark red with gold edges. 3 long scars ran down his face. This was Han, the leader of all dragons in this part of the world. "So," Han said, leaning close to look at Jia, "this is the last one." His breath smelled like burning metal. His eyes were like 2 small suns. "Are you sure there are no more?" Han asked Quan. "We have searched the city many times," Quan said. "This one was well hidden. Her body temperature is unusually low. Han's eyes narrowed. Interesting. Take her to Nari for testing. Quan bowed again and carried Jia to another part of the ship. This new area was filled with strange machines and glass boxes. Some boxes held pieces of humans, arms, legs, heads. Jia looked away. A female dragon stood by a table of tools. She was smaller than Quan, but had the same red scales. When she saw Jia, her eyes widened. A complete specimen, Neri said. Alive. Commander Han wants her tested, Quan said. Neri nodded. Put her in containment cell 3. Quan placed Jia in a glass box with small holes in the top. Then he left. Nari moved closer to the box, studying Jia like she was a strange bug. Can you speak? Nari asked. Jia said nothing. She looked around the room instead. There were buttons and panels everywhere. One panel near her box controlled the temperature. Jia could see the numbers changing as the room got hotter or colder. Not talking. That's fine, Nari said. Your body will tell me what I need to know. Nari pressed some buttons. The air in Jia's box got very hot. A normal human would be crying from pain. But Jia closed her eyes and used De's teaching. She made her body cool from the inside. Extraordinary, Nari said, looking at a screen. Your internal temperature is dropping even as the external temperature rises. How are you doing this? Jia opened her eyes but stayed silent. Nari tried another test. She made the box very cold. Again, Jia controlled her body, keeping her core warm while her skin stayed cold. This is why you survived so long, Nari said. You can adapt to temperature changes. The Emperor will be very interested in you. When Nari turned away to write notes, Jia moved closer to the edge of the box. She could almost reach the temperature control panel. If she could just touch it. The door opened, and Quan returned. I am assigned as the human's guard, he said. Nari nodded. Watch her carefully. This one is special. When both dragons looked away, Jia smiled a tiny smile. Being special meant they would keep her alive. And as long as she was alive, she had a chance. A chance to learn more about the dragons. A chance to find their weakness. A chance to escape. The dragons thought they were studying her. They didn't know she was studying them too. 3 days passed in the glass box. Jia watched the dragons' routines. Nari came in the morning. She ran tests until midday. Then Quan watched Jia until night. Other dragons sometimes visited to look at the last human. On the 4th day, Nari brought a chair to Jia's box and sat down. I know you can talk, Nari said. And I know you're smart. Let's stop pretending. Jia looked at the dragon scientist. Should she speak? What would De tell her to do? After a moment, she decided. Why did you come to Earth? Jia asked. Her voice was rough from not being used. Nari's eyes widened. It speaks. Excellent. She leaned forward. We came because we had to. Our home world grew cold. Our sun was dying. We needed heat. So you killed billions of people for heat. Jia's hands formed fists. Your species was perfect, Nari said, not seeming to notice Jia's anger. Humans make more heat than any creatures we found. And there were so many of you. Jia looked around the lab. Where do you keep the other humans? There are no others, Nari said. At least, we thought there weren't until Quan found you. Jia knew this was a lie. There had to be others. The dragons wouldn't kill all humans if they needed heat. What happens to me now? Jia asked. More tests, Nari said. Your ability to control your body heat is unusual. I want to understand how you do it. When Nari left for a break, Quan came to guard Jia. Unlike the other times, he stood close to her box. How old are you? He asked quietly. Jia was surprised. No dragon had asked personal questions before. 14, she said. How old are you? 22 cycles, Quan said. Young for a dragon. That's why I'm just a guard. Jia noted this information. Young dragons had lower positions. This was useful to know. Were you born on your home world? She asked. Quan nodded. I barely remember it. We left when I was small. Do you miss it? Sometimes. Quan looked around to make sure they were alone. Not all dragons wanted to hunt humans. Some of us, like Commander Sun, thought we should have farmed you instead. Farmed? Jia asked. Keep some humans alive. Let them have children. Take heat only when needed. It would last longer. Quan sighed. But Emperor Jin wanted quick results. This was new information. There were different groups among the dragons. Some disagreed with killing all humans. This could be helpful. Later, when Nari returned, she placed electrodes on the glass box. I want to measure your response to different stimuli, she said. Nari showed Jia pictures of food, other humans, and scenes from Earth before the invasion. She watched Jia's temperature change with each image. Fascinating, Nari said. Your emotions affect your heat output, but you can control it. How? Jia didn't answer, but while Nari was focused on her screens, Jia's hand shot out through a feeding hole in the box. She grabbed a small metal tool from Nari's table and quickly pulled it into her box. She hid it in her sleeve before Nari turned back. That night, when the lab was dark and only emergency lights glowed red, Jia examined her stolen tool. It was a thermal cutter, a small device dragons used to measure and cut heat patterns. Jia smiled. With this, she could practice something she had only dreamed about, not just cooling her body, but heating specific parts of it. If she could make her right hand hot while keeping the rest of her body cold, she might fool the dragon's heat sensors. I'm not just surviving now, Jia whispered to herself. I'm fighting back. She began to practice with the thermal cutter, teaching herself to control not just the absence of heat but heat itself. The first spark of resistance was lit. For 2 weeks, Jia practiced with the thermal cutter at night when the dragons weren't watching. She learned to make her left hand hot while keeping her right hand cold. She could create a warm spot on her forehead while the rest of her body stayed cool. One morning, Nari came to the lab looking worried. She spoke in a low voice to another dragon. Commander Sun is coming to see the human, Nari said. He doesn't believe Han's reports about her abilities. The other dragon looked scared. Sun has many followers now. If he challenges Han, keep quiet, Nari warned. We must show loyalty to Han. Jia listened carefully. So there was trouble between the dragon leaders. This could be useful. Later that day, a new dragon entered the lab. He was larger than Han, with bright yellow scales that looked like sunlight. His eyes were deep orange, almost kind-looking. So this is the temperature-controlling human, Commander Sun said. His voice was softer than the other dragons. May I speak with her alone? Nari looked nervous but left the room. Sun pulled a chair close to Jia's box. Do you know why you're special, little one? Sun asked. Jia watched him carefully. Because I can control my body heat. Sun nodded. Humans make heat in a way no other creature can. It comes from something inside you, something we dragons don't understand. What's that? Jia asked. You call it will, or sometimes spirit. It makes you fight when you should give up. It makes you hope when there is no reason to hope. Sun leaned closer. Some dragons think humans are just food. I think you're much more. Jia didn't know if she should trust Sun, but she needed information. Are there other humans alive? She asked. Sun was quiet for a moment. Yes. Not many, but some. We keep them in the thermal core. What's the thermal core? The heart of our ship. It powers everything. Sun looked sad. We use humans to generate heat there. Jia felt sick. You're burning them. Not burning. Draining. Slowly taking their heat while keeping them alive. Sun looked at her directly. It's cruel. My people have become cruel because we are afraid of dying. But I believe there's a better way. Before Sun could say more, the door opened. Commander Han walked in with 4 guard dragons. "Commander Sun," Han said coldly, "you didn't inform me of your visit to my lab." "I wanted to see the human myself," Sun replied, standing up. "She is remarkable." "Yes, and she belongs to my research team," Han said. "You have your own duties." The two dragons stared at each other. The air between them seemed to burn. "Of course," Sun finally said. He looked at Ja one last time. "Remember what I said, little one. Will is stronger than fear." After Sun left, Han ordered more guards to watch the lab. "The human is not to be left alone," he told Neri. "And Commander Sun is not allowed to visit again." That night, Ja thought about what Sun had said. There were other humans alive in the thermal core. Maybe Dai was there too. And there was fighting between the dragons. This was her chance. Jia took out the thermal cutter and practiced harder than before. She made her whole body cold, then created a moving spot of heat that traveled from her hand to her shoulder. The dragons watched heat like humans watched light. If she could control it well enough, she could make them see things that weren't there. For the first time since being captured, Jia felt something new grow inside her. Not just hope, but a plan. The dragons thought they understood fire, but they didn't understand human fire, the kind that burned in the heart and mind. That kind of fire couldn't be seen, but it was the strongest fire of all. 3 more days passed. Ja noticed the dragons were tense. They spoke in low voices when they thought she couldn't hear. Something big was happening. On the 4th morning, no one came to the lab. Ja waited, watching the door. After 2 hours, she heard shouting in the hallway. Then a loud boom shook the walls. "It's starting," Ja whispered to herself. She took out the thermal cutter. For weeks she had practiced with it. Now it was time to use it for real. The lab door opened. Quan rushed in, looking scared. "What's happening?" Jia asked. "Commander Sun has attacked Han's forces," Quan said. "There's fighting all over the ship." This was her chance. While Quan checked the hallway, Jia pressed the thermal cutter against the lock of her box. She focused her mind and sent heat into her hand. The cutter glowed red. The lock began to melt. When Quan turned back, Jia was sitting quietly, the cutter hidden in her sleeve. "I need to move you to a safer place," Quan said. "Where?" Jia asked. Commander Han ordered all valuable specimens moved to the lower level. Quan opened her box and reached in to grab her. Jia acted fast. She placed her hand on Quan's arm and released a burst of heat. "Ah!" Quan jumped back, surprised by the burning sensation. "How did you?" But Jia was already moving. She slipped out of the box and ran for the door. Behind her, Quan recovered quickly. "Stop!" he shouted. "The hallways are dangerous." Jia didn't listen. She ran into the corridor, which was filled with smoke. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. In the distance, she heard roars and the sound of fire blasts. Which way to the thermal core? Sun had said it was the heart of the ship. It must be in the center, down below. Jia found a map on the wall. It showed the ship's layout. The thermal core was marked with a red flame symbol, 3 levels down. She memorized the route and started running again. Behind her, she heard Quan calling. "Human, come back. You'll die out there." Was he really worried about her safety, or just afraid of losing a valuable specimen? Jib didn't care. She was free, and she was going to find the other humans. She turned a corner and nearly ran into 2 fighting dragons. One wore Han's dark red symbol. The other had Sun's yellow mark. They were so busy trying to burn each other that they didn't notice the small human slipping past them. Jia found a service ladder that went down through the floors. The metal was hot, but she cooled her hands and climbed down quickly. 1 level, 2 levels. On the 3rd level down, she exited into a wide corridor. The air here was much hotter. Sweat poured down her face. A normal human would pass out in this heat. Jia closed her eyes and used De's technique. She imagined her body becoming cool like a mountain stream. Her breathing slowed. Her skin temperature dropped. She opened her eyes and kept moving. Two guard dragons stood at a massive door at the end of the corridor. They looked alert, weapons ready. The door was marked with the same flame symbol Jia had seen on the map, the thermal core. She couldn't fight her way past the guards. She needed a trick. Jia focused on her new skills. She made her body very cold, almost invisible to heat sensors. Then she created a hot spot and pushed it away from herself, like throwing a ball. The heat signature moved down the hall in the opposite direction. The guards noticed the heat. A human escaping. One shouted. Both dragons ran toward the false heat signature, leaving the door unguarded. Jia smiled and ran to the door. It had a simple touch panel lock. She placed her palm on it and sent heat in the pattern she had seen dragons use. The door slid open. Before entering, she looked back. In the chaos of the ship, no one had noticed her escape. No one except Quan, who stood at the far end of the hall, watching her. Their eyes met. Quan nodded once, then turned and walked away. Jia took a deep breath and stepped into the thermal core. The thermal core was like nothing Jia had ever seen. The room was huge and round. In the center stood a tall column of blue-white light that reached from floor to ceiling. The heat was terrible, like standing next to a fire. But what made Jia gasp were the walls. Glass tubes lined every wall, hundreds of them, and in each tube floated a human body. No, Jia whispered. She walked closer to the tubes. The people inside were alive but asleep. Thin wires connected to their bodies. Machines hummed nearby, drawing heat from the humans and sending it to the light column. Jia pressed her hands against one of the tubes. Inside was a small boy, maybe 7 years old. His chest moved up and down slowly. He was alive, but trapped in a deep sleep. "They're batteries," said a voice behind her. "That's all we are to them. Batteries." Jia spun around. A tall dragon stood in the doorway. He was different from the others. His scales were pure white, and he carried a long staff that glowed red at the tip. This was Min, one of the elite fire knights who guarded the most important parts of the ship. "You're the special human," Min said. "The one who controls temperature." He stepped closer. "You should not be here." Jia backed away. The thermal cutter was in her hand, but it would be useless against a fire knight. "I just want to free my people," she said. Min shook his head. "Impossible. They power the ship. Without them, we all die." Jia's mind raced. She needed time to think, to find a way past this dragon. "Why do dragons need so much heat?" she asked. Min seemed surprised by the question. "Our bodies require heat to live, just as yours require air," he explained. "On our homeworld, there was plenty of heat from our sun. But then our sun began to die. We had to find a new source." "Humans," Jia said. "Yes." Min looked at the tubes. "Your kind generates heat in a way no other species can. Even when resting, even when cold, humans produce heat from inside." As Min talked, Jia noticed something. At the far end of the room, one of the tubes looked different. The person inside seemed familiar. She squinted, trying to see better. The person had short gray hair and a kind face, even in sleep. "Dad." Jia's heart jumped. Dad was alive. Her teacher, her protector, the closest thing to a father she had ever known. He was here, just across the room. Min saw where she was looking. "You know that one." "He taught me," Jia said honestly. "He taught me how to control my temperature." Min's eyes widened. "He can do it too." "He's better than me," Jia said. Then she had an idea. A dangerous, crazy idea. Jia closed her eyes. She gathered all her strength and did something she had never tried before. Instead of making her body cold, she made it hot. Very hot. Her skin began to glow red. Min stepped back in shock. "What are you doing?" "Showing you what humans can really do," Jia said. The heat from her body grew stronger. Sweat poured down her face. This was dangerous. If she got too hot, she could die. But she needed to surprise Min long enough to get past him. The dragon raised his staff, ready to attack. But then he hesitated. He had never seen a human do this before. In that moment of hesitation, Jia did something else new. She pushed the heat out from her body in a wave, like a small explosion. The force knocked Min back against the wall. Before he could recover, Jia ran across the room to Da's tube. She placed her hands on the glass and focused all her remaining energy. Heat flowed from her hands, melting the glass. Alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed. The system detected the tube being damaged. Min got to his feet, angry now. "Stop. You'll kill him if you open it wrong." But Jia knew what she was doing. As the glass melted, she carefully cooled the area around Da's body, protecting him from the heat. The glass cracked open. The liquid inside poured out, carrying Da with it. Jia caught him as he fell forward. "Da," she whispered. "Wake up. Please wake up." Min approached, staff raised. "Step away from him, human." Jia held Da close. "No, he's coming with me." Then Da's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy at first, then cleared. He looked at Jia. "Little Flame," he whispered, using his old nickname for her. "You found me. We need to free the others," Da said, his voice weak after months of sleep. He tried to stand but fell back into Jia's arms. Min moved closer, his staff pointed at them. "You cannot free them all. The ship needs their heat." Jia looked at the hundreds of tubes. He was right. She couldn't free everyone at once. But maybe. "There's another way," she said. "The dragons don't need to take all our heat, just some of it." Min lowered his staff slightly. "What do you mean?" "Humans can give heat willingly," Jia explained, "without being put to sleep, without pain." From across the room came the sound of the door opening. Nari rushed in, followed by several guard dragons. The human escaped. Nari shouted. Then she saw Jia and stopped. "What have you done?" Jia stood tall, keeping Da behind her. "I'm showing you a better way." "She freed one of the batteries," Min reported. "And she controlled her heat in a way I've never seen." Nari pushed past Min to see Da. "Impossible. Humans cannot control their heat like that." "This one taught me how," Jia said, pointing to Da. "And together, we can teach others." More dragons entered the room. Among them was Commander Sun, his yellow scales bright against the blue light of the core. "Listen to the human," Sun commanded. "I want to hear what she proposes." The dragons fell silent. Jia took a deep breath. "Your way of taking heat kills humans slowly," she said. "But humans create heat best when they're alive and healthy. If you free them, let them live normal lives. They will give you heat freely." "Nonsense," said a new voice. Commander Han pushed through the crowd, his dark red scales gleaming. "Humans would never help us after what we've done." "We would," Dad said, finding his strength. "To survive. To rebuild. We can share this world." Han laughed. "Pretty words. But how would this work? How would we collect the heat?" This was something Jia had been thinking about. She looked at the thermal cutter in her hand. "This tool measures heat," she said. "It can be made bigger. Humans could stand near it for an hour each day. It would take some heat. Not all. Everyone would live." The dragons looked at each other, unsure. Jia knew she needed to show them, not just tell them. She walked to a control panel near the central column. The dragons watched, ready to stop her, but Commander Sun held up his hand, letting her continue. "These controls connect the tubes to the core," Jia said. "I can change them. Make them take less heat, but keep the connection." Neri stepped forward. "That's my research station. You can't." "Let her try," Sun ordered. With Day's help, Jia began to adjust the settings. She used what she had learned watching Nari work. The lights on the panel changed from red to yellow to green. "There," Jia said. Now the system will take only the extra heat humans make, not the heat they need to live. A low hum filled the room. The blue-white column flickered, then stabilized. It's working, Daz said in amazement. Han moved closer, his eyes narrow. This changes nothing. The Emperor will never agree to free the humans. Maybe he will, Sun said, when he sees this. He pointed to Ja, who had placed her hands on the central column. She was sending her heat directly into it, making the column glow brighter. But unlike the sleeping humans in tubes, she controlled how much heat she gave. Her face showed no pain, only concentration. One awake human, Sun said, giving more heat willingly than 10 sleeping ones forced to give it. The dragons watched in silence. Even Han had no response. Jia stepped back from the column, tired but smiling. This is human fire, she said. Given freely, it burns brighter than any fire you can steal. Day put his arm around her shoulders, proud. Around the room, the sleeping humans in their tubes seemed to glow brighter too, as if responding to Jo's words. For the first time since the dragons came to Earth, a new future seemed possible. Not one where humans were hunted to extinction, but one where two species might find a way to live together. 3 days after Jia showed the dragons her new way, Emperor Jin himself arrived. His ship was twice the size of Commander Han's, and his scales were the color of deep blue fire. The Emperor did not come alone. With him came 20 fire knights, each carrying a glowing staff. He also brought a special device, a communication orb that let him speak to all dragons on Earth at once. Jia and Dai stood in the great meeting hall with Commanders Sun and Han on either side. Hundreds of dragons watched from all around. The air was hot with tension. So, Emperor Jin said, his voice like rolling thunder, "This is the human girl who thinks she can change our ways." Jia stepped forward, trying not to show fear. "I only showed a better way, one that helps both our kinds." The Emperor's large eyes studied her. "You are very small to cause so much trouble." Commander Sun bowed. "Great Emperor, I have tested the humans' method. It works better than our old way. We can get more heat from willing humans than from dying ones." "And why would humans help us after we killed so many of them?" Jin asked. Day stepped forward. "Because we want to live, and we can forgive if you can change." The Emperor laughed. "Forgive? You would forgive us?" "Not forget," Jia said, "but move forward, together." Jin was quiet for a long time. The dragons held their breath. Finally, he spoke. "Show me this new method." They took the Emperor to the thermal core. Jia had been busy there. Already 50 humans were awake and free from their tubes. They stood around the central column, giving heat in the new way. Jin watched as the column glowed brighter than ever before. "The numbers don't lie," Nari explained. "Willing humans give 30% more heat than sleeping ones." The Emperor walked slowly around the room. He stopped at one of the tubes that still held a sleeping human. "And if I order all humans to remain in these tubes?" he asked. "Then we will teach them all to control their heat," Jia said. "Like I can." She made her hand glow hot, then cold. "You won't be able to find us or use us." It was partly a bluff. Not all humans could learn what she and Dai could do. But the Emperor didn't know that. Jin looked at Commanders Sun and Han. "What do you two think?" Sun bowed. "The human way is better, Great Emperor. It gives us more heat and a lasting supply." Han hesitated, then spoke. "I agree with Sun. The girl has shown us a better path." The Emperor turned back to Jia. "Very well. I will try your way, human child. But know this, if you are lying, if this fails, we will burn every last human from this world." "It won't fail," Jia said. "Human fire burns strongest when given freely." That day, Emperor Jin used his communication orb to give new orders to all dragons on Earth. Stop hunting humans. Start working with them. Many dragons didn't like the new way. Some fought against it. But as weeks passed, more humans were found and awakened. They joined Jia and Dai in teaching the dragons about cooperation instead of conquest. 1 year later, Jia stood on a hill overlooking the rebuilt city of Seoul. Humans walked the streets again. Dragons flew overhead, not hunting but protecting. It wasn't perfect. There was still fear on both sides, still anger, but it was a beginning. Quan landed beside her on the hill. "The last dragon rebels have surrendered," he said. "Emperor Jin is pleased." "And the humans?" Jia asked. "More come out of hiding every day," Quan said. "Some even want to visit the dragon homeworld someday." Jia smiled. "I'd like to see that too." Below in the city, a new building stood where her orphanage once was. It wasn't an orphanage anymore. It was a school where young dragons and young humans learned together. They called it the Prevailing Fire School. Day was the head teacher. His favorite lesson was the story of one orphan girl who showed two worlds that the strongest fire comes not from taking, but from sharing. As the sun set, Jia felt a warmth inside that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the warmth of knowing that sometimes the smallest flame can change the world.